Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 24th of January of 2024. Today we have a lot of very terrible updates, so let's start. As you know, that tragedy took place above the territory of Belgorod in the Belgorod sky. This morning, somewhere at 11 a.m. of the local time, to be more precise, at 11:50, we got update that somehow, for some reason, the Russian aircraft, the Russian plane fall down. That was Il-76. Everybody was shocked at first. Maybe somebody missed this update, thinking that this is not something important or interesting. But after that, more and more Telegram channels and Twitter channels, different channels, continue publishing more and more details, and everybody got involved into the situation, trying to understand what did happen. So after the first scenes, after the first videos, how the plane was fell down, we got another video, another report of work of air defense. On this, for example, photo, we can see the sign in the sky of air defense. And after that, the Ukrainian sources started publishing that as a result of special Ukrainian operation, the Ukrainians managed to shoot down the Russian cargo aircraft. So this information was published not by the official channels, mainly by the pro-Ukrainian Telegram channels, military experts, and different other bloggers and so on, who probably has some connections with, let's say, authorities and military forces and so on. So that was the first wave, the first shock. The Ukrainians were so happy that as a result of special Ukrainian operation, they managed to shut down the, let's say, cargo aircraft. According to the first Ukrainian version, that was the cargo aircraft that were flying from Egypt with the weapon, not flying from the Egypt, flying from Iran through Egypt with the missiles and drones that the Russians were planning to use in Ukraine, something like this. And after that first shock, after those first waves of glory and celebrations from the Ukrainian side, the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation started publishing more and more updates. And somewhere at correct me if I'm wrong, somewhere at 12 p.m. of the local time, the Russians reported that on board the fallen Il-76 there were around 65 captured military prisoners, personnel of the Ukrainian armed forces transported to Belgorod region for exchange, 6 crew members and 3 accompanying personnel. So the persons who were, let's say, protecting, and it was like some part of security, everyone died. And after that, we saw the transformation of Ukrainian, let's say, Telegram segment of internet, Telegram and X and Twitter and so on. The Ukrainians, first of all, they started denying. So everything, when talking about the situation, the Ukrainian society, the Ukrainians themselves and the Russians maybe as well, bypassed the 5 stages of acceptance. You know that these 5 stages, when trading, denying, anger, and then maybe the depression, and the final stage is acceptance of the reality. So after the first shock, the Ukrainians of course start denying, and we got significant number of different fairy tales that some Ukrainian sources were saying that the soldiers, there were no Ukrainian soldiers, that there were Russian soldiers. Even if there were Ukrainian soldiers, those Ukrainian soldiers were tortured, and the Russians made this, let's say, fell like there, it was like not false flag, it was like the play story trying to, let's say, to hide the evidences of the torture. So different fairy tales from the Ukrainian side, and that was the stage of denying from their side. But of course you can deny, you can accept, it's up to you. But so everybody was expecting of official position of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, or at least of the general staff, or maybe from intelligence service. But after 2 or 3 hours after that crash, we didn't receive even a single report or note from the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine. The Russians still were waiting And after that, the Russians published the official version, official situation of that attack. And according to the Ministry of Defense, at 11 a.m. 15 minutes, the Ukrainians shot down the Russian plane with the military personnel of Ukrainian prisoners of war that were flying in direction of Belgrade or somewhere in this area for exchange purposes. According to the agreement between Russian Federation and Ukrainians, today either the Russians and the Ukrainians were planning to start exchange process, and they were planning to exchange around 200 prisoners of war for another 200 prisoners of war. But after that terrorist attack, the Russians took a decision to stop the deal and to stop exchange process. The Russians was very fast because they had everything. They had every single evidence. They made a special group in parliament. They were talking a lot. They prepared a special letter and special note to the United States of America, to Germany, telling them that the Ukrainians using your weapon, your Patriot IRST systems, shot down the, let's say, even civilian plane, because that wasn't a military plane. Yes, there were just military forces on board, mainly prisoners of war. I don't know whether we can't call prisoners of war as military personnel. I don't think we can't. And using your weapon, the Ukrainians shot down civilian plane. So the situation continued developing, and during the day, almost after 4 or 5 hours of that situation, we hadn't received even a single, let's say, message or note from the Ukrainian military authorities. But of course, everybody was waiting. The Russians reported that they attacked. The Ukrainians made attack from the village by the name of Liptsim. This is the village, and if we calculate, this is approximately the area of the fall of Russian plane. And during all this period of time, during all these calculations, the Ukrainians continue saying that that wasn't, let's say, a plane with Ukrainian prisoners of war and many other things. The Russians, to enforce their positions, published a list of Ukrainian losses of lost Ukrainian prisoners of war somewhere at 3 p.m. of the local time. So basically, after almost, let's say, more than 4 hours after the accident. And only after the Russians published the list, the Ukrainians confirmed or accepted, or not accepted, they entered the next stage of the acceptance, this process. They got a trade. They start trading. So what does it mean they start trading? First note we got from the minister from the general staff, and according to information we have, the general staff reported that they are not planning to. So they're saying that that general staff, the main purpose of the general staff is to secure the sky, is to shut down planes, is to shut down and destroy the military objects. And the general staff reported that almost every single day, usually a lot of planes arrive in Belgrade, and after every second after another arrival of another plane, Il-76 to Belgrade, the Russians start usually bomb and attack Ukraine with drones, with missiles. So that was just a regular routine. We didn't know that there was like a plane with prisoners of war. We just were doing our military job. We saw Il-76. We knew that if Il-76 arrived, then the Russians would start bombing and attacking Ukraine. So we did everything we should do according to the, let's say, protocol. After this post of general staff, that according to this post, we see that they're not denying that they have responsibility, that they're responsible for that attack. The Ministry of Intelligence, not intelligence, the intelligence service of Ukraine, publish their own information, and they make like all the necessary conclusions. And the most important conclusion and the most important part of this trade acceptance stage, that Ukrainians are saying yes, that probably we, the Ukrainians, shot down the plane, but we shot down the plane because the Russians, for the first time since the beginning of the special military operation, for the first time during all these exchange processes, the Russians haven't provided us, the Ukrainians, the information about the ways and roads how the Ukrainians are planning to get the prisoners of war to the exchange area. So usually in the past, the Russians were saying, okay, Ukrainian side, we will bring you 200 prisoners of war, and for these purposes we're going to use this prison, this road, this car, this aircraft, this train, and you will get the prisoners on this street and this point. So, and now the Ukrainians didn't know how exactly the Russians were planning to do this. So that's why some authorities, Ukrainian authorities who were responsible for air defense, they didn't know whether the Russians are going to use trains, cars, or planes. So that's why, according to the Ukrainians, the Ukrainian forces were doing the regular job. They saw a military object and they took a decision to shut this object down. Of course, the situation, this is tragedy, and for the Ukrainians and for the Russians as well, because not just Ukrainians were died as a result of that situation. Also, the Russian crew died as a result of that situation. But most of the people were focused on this situation, and most of the people lost few important updates that probably are related to this situation and that probably can explain us a lot. At least when talking about me, there were a few updates that took place today that explained me everything, and now as for me, I have my own opinion. I will not give you my 100% opinion because maybe you will not understand this and maybe this is not quite correct. I will give you just a few things that you need to understand and you need to keep in your mind when talking about the situation in Belgorod with that missile strike and so on. During the day, somewhere at 5 p.m. of the local time, at 5:30, around 5:30 of the local time, we got very important update from some Ukrainian deputies and some Ukrainian Telegram and news channels that are connected with very important persons, with the top level authorities of Ukraine. And that sources start spreading information that the Ukrainians were planning to start the final voting for total mobilization law tomorrow on the 25th of January. This is very important. And an hour later, after the Ukrainian sources, after the general staff and the Ministry of let's say intelligence published their own positions about the situation with that flight, with that plane, the other group of Ukrainian representatives of parliament posted the information that speculations about starting voting on the 25th of January of total mobilization law was just speculations. So the Ukrainians didn't plan and were not going to start this final, let's say, voting on the 25th of January. So as you can see, an hour later, after the Ministry, General Staff and Intelligence Services publishes the official positions that the Ukrainians were responsible for that attack, the Ukrainians took a decision to let's say dismiss, to delete any updates, any news about possible voting for mobilization. So what is the connection between mobilization, these aircraft, and the other things? The thing is that currently the Ukrainians have significant problems in Avdiivka. The Ukrainians have significant problems all over the combat line, not just Avdiivka, Kharkiv, everywhere. The Ukrainians are defeating everywhere. And they understand that they need to mobilize people. They need to mobilize another army, a very significant number of forces to slow down the Russians and basically to stabilize the front line. And the Ukrainians couldn't do this due to the problems in Kharkiv, in Zaporozhye, in Novomikhailivka, Avdiivka, Kupiansk, Liman, Bakhmut. They couldn't do this because basically they were adopting a very terrible and a very difficult law that will give the Ukrainians possibilities to mobilize 500,000 army, and very likely that more than 60 or even 70% of these people would die during the special military operation. So that's why the Ukrainians were planning, as I understand, to create a positive media situation. What does it mean, positive media situation? The Ukrainians on the 24th of January were planning to make exchange process of prisoners of war. Obviously, this is a very good media positive event. So you can, if you, let's say, from Parliament or Zelensky, you can create a very positive situation and tell people, you see, we are cool guys, we return our people from the prison and now they will return back to the normal life. And as I understand, also the Ukrainians did have some plans was to shut down the Russian aircraft, and probably the Ukrainians knew that they're going to be cargo, or maybe the Russians sent them information that they're going to be Il-76 cargo, Il-76 that would come from Iran with ammo and something like this, and the Ukrainians did have a special operation, or they were planning to shut down this plane, and they shut it down, but the Ukrainians couldn't even realize that they would shutting down the aircraft with the prisoners of war. So they just wanted to achieve these small 2 media victories, and based on that 2 media victories, the Ukrainians were planning to adopt total mobilization law on the 5th of January. But as we know, everything went wrong, and the Ukrainians took a decision to move the voting to a known period of time. So probably we can't say that this is something that the Russians managed to achieve as a result of the situation. A tragedy took place in the sky above Belgrade, but anyway, we can see that the Russians now managed to get the situation in the war with Ukraine when the Ukrainians can't adopt a total mobilization law. And this law is very important. Now the Russians are in offensive state, and of course for them it's very good, and it's going to be as good as more the Ukrainians will be forced to delay this adoption for, let's say, unknown and unpredictable time. So anyway, the current situation, it's a tragedy. We can't say that it plays in someone's favor and something like this. We can't say this. But if we will remove all these things with the feelings, obviously the main benefits from this situation got the Russians. The Ukrainians shown themselves as not very good, reliable, partners. They used Western weapon to shut down civilian plane, and they were forced to delay the voting for total mobilization law. Now we're moving to the situation on the ground, and first we're going to move to Avdiivka, because today the Russian sources one by one started publishing updates about the situation in Tsarskaya Khota, and the Russians published the full video how they were making and doing the pipe below Avdiivka area, and they gave us the entire details and entire explanation how they managed to complete and to finish that special operation. On this video, for example, we can see that pipe, we can see the Russian soldiers who were making the things, because you know that the situation there was very difficult. That pipe was completely fully loaded with different stuff. I don't think you want to know what exactly was in those pipe, but the Russians spent also lots of time, but they managed to clear the pipe. The Russians are saying that they could do these things with pipe only during active clashes, because of course all those things they did in pipe made a lot of sound, a lot of noise. So the only time they could do this during some offensive operation, when there was artillery strikes, mortar strikes, and just during this period of time they were able to clear and to prepare the pipe for further offensive operation. So once again, I'll remind you that this is approximately the area of the pipe, and where the pipe were laying down, the Russians bypassed this area, landed behind Tsarskaya Khota, and as a result of offensive operation, the special operation, they managed to, let's say, neutralize the Ukrainian forces in Tsarskaya Khota just within a few hours, because the Ukrainians, of course, didn't expect the Russians, and they just lost the entire garrison of this area, the Ukrainians. And after that, according to the Russians, they dig in deeper. As once again, as we discussed, then the Russian main forces started offensive operation against the Ukrainian defense belt along the railways, where the Ukrainians managed to dig in very heavy deeper since the 2014 and something like this. The Ukrainians started fighting with the Russians. Of course, the Ukrainians sent or called for some reinforcement. The Ukrainian reinforcement started moving along all these streets, and according to the Russians, during the first day, the Russians were able to hold this area for 1 day, and the Ukrainians even didn't know that they were Russians. So during 24 hours, the Ukrainians were sending more and more waves to the south, and most of those waves were completely destroyed in this small square between Tsarskaya Khota and, let's say, Soborная, Sportivная, Chernyshevskого street. Entire 24 hours, the Ukrainians didn't know what did happen and why their soldiers, why they have significant losses when they send their army to the south. In the entire day. The only few interesting things also about that operation, the Russians are saying that there were 3 attempts to go to Tsarskaya Khota. When the Russians launched the offensive operation for the first time, and the Russian soldiers start moving, and at some point the oxygen in the pipe ended. Imagine yourself, you have bypassed significant distance and oxygen has ended. So imagine yourself the situation with the soldiers, and because how to survive, how to get back, how to get to the area with oxygen. And the Russians were forced to step back. Then they sent more engineer forces, more engineer squads, and those engineer squads added additional, let's say structures to this pipe that allowed this area to fulfill with oxygen or something like this. I hope you understand what I'm saying. Then the Russians made the second attempt, and then probably the weather changed or something like this, and this entire pipe was filled with cold water, and the Russians were forced to step back once again. They were waiting when the pipe got clear, and just on the third attempt, the Russians bypassed this territory, landed in this area, encircled the Ukrainian forces in Tsarskaya Okhota, and now we see what we see. And we see the things that the Ukrainians in this area was split in two parts. Some Ukrainians still have positions along the railways. The Russians are storming this territory from the south. Basically, the Ukrainians are encircled, and the Ukrainian forces from the central part are trying to deblockade the Ukrainians on the south. But just during the few days, the Ukrainians lost up to 1 battalion during those attempts. The Ukrainians continue having losses, and for now, the Russians probably continue trying to stabilize the area. And as we discussed, according to some sources, the Russians managed to establish complete control over these streets. But anyway, the clashes continues. The Ukrainians are not going to give up. They will send endless number of forces, because they understand if the Russians are able to repel every single attack and to dig in deeper, then the days of Avdiivka will be very, very numbered, and the numbers are going to be very, very short. So this is the situation about Avdiivka. When talking about the northern flank, the clashes continues. The Ukrainians managed to restore some positions along the railways. The Russians managed to destroy another Ukrainian Bradley somewhere in the vicinity of Stepovo with FPV drone strike. Nothing special. The front line in this area is stabilized. When talking about Marinka area, there were no updates. Just, let's say, some sources reported that the Russians managed to restore positions over the coal mine. If you remember, a few days ago we were talking in the road that Ukrainians returned control over this territory as a result of counterattacks. In Marinka, the Russians continue pushing along the main streets in Georgievka. Now, using FPV drones and other Ukrainian positions was under very heavy fire of Russian drones. As a result of those attacks, few buildings, few strongholds were destroyed, but also without any movements on the ground. The Russians continue offensive operation from Marinka to Pobeda. There were some updates and geolocations of Russian T-90 Prorыв tank attack. That's nothing special. Just for now, it's just attempts to destroy Ukrainian strongholds within a distance from T-90 tank. Yet the Russians haven't started any ground operation. About Novomikhailivka, we got updates that Ukrainians, as a result of counter-offensive operation, managed to restore some positions among the fields in this area. So, according to some Russians, this territory was returned by the Ukrainians as a result of counter-offensive operation. For now, we're not going to update the map because we don't have any geolocated proofs, but very likely the Ukrainians managed to do this. When talking about Zaporozhye and Vremivka tactical bridgehead, we haven't received anything from this territory. The only important note we got from Zaporozhye direction is that the Russians allow the citizens of Zaporozhye who has Ukrainian passport to vote on the Russian president elections. It's nothing special, nothing important, just another joke from Putin on Zelensky, because as you know, Zelensky is not going to make any presidential elections because he will lose these elections. Everybody understand this, but as you can see, Ukrainians will have elections in 2024, but in 2024 the Ukrainians with Ukrainian passport will vote for president of Russian Federation. So like a small joke on Zelensky. When talking about Kherson, the Russians renew their bombing and attacking of Ukrainian forces with FABs. They start using FABs significantly once again. A lot of aviation bombs were dropped by the Russians on this territory, and we start receiving more and more updates of that. So the Russians return to the, let's say, old status of October and September of 2023. If you remember, after November, November, the Russians stopped using FABs, and now, as you can see, they're returning to the same tactics. They're bombing and destroying the Ukrainian forces among the islands and so on. I don't think the Ukrainians have some plans to start any landing operation, but anyway, they have some forces, some concentration of forces. Now we're going to move a little bit back to Bakhmut, Artyomov's direction. The Russians continue publishing videos of Lancet strikes against the Ukrainian forces, Ukrainian tanks and artillery forces in the vicinity of Chasov Yar. Just since the beginning of January, probably the Russians managed to destroy maybe around let's say tens of tanks and armored vehicles just as a result of Lancet strikes. On this video we can see, as I understand, 3 strikes to 3 different types of weapon were destroyed, not just in the vicinity of Canal, but also somewhere in the vicinity of Stupachki. Of course, maybe these 2 videos don't give us the real understanding of the situation, and for understanding, of course, we need to increase the numbers of this since the beginning of January. This will give us the better understanding. As you can see, significant superiority. Lancet is like the weapon number 1 on this direction. Lots of artillery systems, tanks, and different types of weapons were destroyed. When talking about Bogdanovka itself and Ivanovsk itself, the Russians continue storming operation. We have the video how the Russians were bombing the Ukrainian positions, the Ukrainian, let's say, stronghold in the trenches between Bogdanovka and Popovo forest with Krasnopol hit, accurate Krasnopol hit, which probably destroyed another Ukrainian position, but yet we haven't received any videos about any ground operation in this area. Also, the Russians were bombing the forest on the northwestern part of Bogdanovka with either TOS flamethrower systems or the Russian engineers on the ground created new type of multi-launch rocket system. They managed to add the warfare ship artillery system on the basic Russian, let's say, armored carrier. This is the video. This is artillery system. This is, let's say, artillery launching system of a ship, of battleships or something like this. And with this type of weapon, the Russians were bombing and attacking the Ukrainians in the forest to the northwest of Bogdanovka, yet without any ground operation. We haven't received anything about Solidar, Liman. According to information we have, the Russians, after a few days of operational pause, launched another wave of attack, and as a result of clashes, the Russians managed to establish control over these territories according to some, let's say, more or less reliable resources. Yet we haven't received even a single geolocated confirmation of that. These are the updates about the progress, but the Ukrainians are saying that they tried to counterattack using armored fist, a lot of tanks. But the Russians repelled that attack, and the Ukrainians, when the Ukrainian tanks were empty, returned back to the base. So the clashes probably ended in Russian favor, and the Russians managed to improve their positions along the line of combat contact. We haven't received anything from Kupiansk direction. The clash is continuous, but without any changes on the ground. Belgorod and Kharkiv we have already discussed. There were also artillery strikes along the border. Once again, the Russians were bombing the cities and villages along the border. But for now, no situation, no changes on the ground, no attempt from the Russian side to attack the Ukrainians. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds you to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.